as you can see, there are a lot of texts here, and we're not going to be going through all of them in depth, but I felt that I would really be undermining the vision of our program and who we are if I didn't try to root my comments to you in sources. So just as you heard from Susan, when Susan first approached me about doing this, of course my initial answer whenever I'm asked to do something is no. That's usually what I say at home as well, so that's not unusual for me. But in this case, I felt I had a principled reason, not just a lazy reason for saying no. Because when I look around this room, it's always been my feeling, and it still is, that I have the easiest job in this room. Because the people I have to teach every day are people like you, who are passionate and engaged and don't throw spitballs. Do people still throw spitballs anymore? Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah. I'm glad to hear that some things stay. And to teach already inspired, motivated adults is perhaps one of the easiest things one could do. And the audiences that you guys have to teach and the tasks that you have to perform are so much harder. And there was a feeling of, who am I to come up here and address all of you? In fact, you are the ones who inspire me. However, and I talked it over with Susan, and she threatened me a little bit with physical violence. We're not going to get into that right now. I realized that one thing maybe I could do, as we're going through these transitions of what the Pardes role with Jewish educators is going to be, I realized one thing I could do is try to articulate for you what are our guiding principles. I mean, when you look around this room, it's an incredibly diverse bunch. Anybody coming in from the outside that would see all the different places on the Jewish spectrum, they would justifiably ask, right, what is it that connects or guides all these people? They're all so different. What they teach, how they teach, what type of role models they are, who they're reaching. And as we were going to grow this program, the question got even stronger. So then what is it? Is there a coherent core, a vision, or guiding principle? And so that is what led me to believe that we could articulate those things. And my attempt here right now is to try to articulate what I call the avodah of Jewish education, and I'll explain in a minute, that this is an avodah, and the principles of that avodah that we all share, as different as we are, still fundamentally unites us as Pardes educators, and I also like to think a lot of other Jewish educators out there. I chose the term avodah, first of all, because in the Torah, avodah has a lot of different meanings, right? Sometimes avodah can mean service, the idea of serving something other than oneself, a higher calling, if you will. Sometimes avodah can mean worship, a way of expressing gratitude or commitment or a connection to ultimate meaning. And the last one, which I know will fit very nicely, sometimes avodah can refer to bone-crushing labor, sometimes labor that appears senseless. And I realize a lot of what we do sometimes has that component as well. And so thinking about education as an avodah, that led me to ask, well, who is the classic Eved in the Torah? And it turns out Moshe is referred to as an Eved Ne'eman, a faithful servant, an Eved Hashem. That becomes his moniker. And therefore, it led me to believe that perhaps by looking at who Moshe was and what he did, we could start to emerge with a picture of some guiding principles, or I'll even use a stronger term, core truths that define our educational mission. This is my cool PowerPoint, okay? Took me, I didn't do it. Okay, so we're gonna lay out some guiding principles in the avodah of teaching. Okay, the first one, right? Torah, and text. Why the Jewish bookcase should be in the center of the room. So when you look at your source sheet, right, the idea of Moshe Rabbeinu, what Moshe ultimately is most famous for in Jewish tradition, are not the miracles that he performs. And in fact, it's not for leading the people into the land, because he doesn't succeed at that goal. Moshe in Jewish tradition is celebrated as our greatest teacher. He is the bringer of Torah. And if you take a look at this first source from Shabbat, right? It says, when Moshe descended from before God, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, Satan asked, Sovereign of the universe, where is the Torah? And God said, I've given it to the earth. So Satan goes to earth, where is the Torah? He goes to the sea and asks for the Torah. Everyone's saying, I don't have it, I don't have it. Finally, someone tells him, go to the son of Amram, that's Moshe, and he went and asked him. So he goes to Moshe, where is the Torah? And Moshe says, who am I that God should give the Torah to me? God said to Moshe, Moshe, you're going to lie? Right? So Moshe then says, right? Moshe finally fesses up. He says, you have a stored up treasure in which you have take delight every day. Shall I keep benefit for myself? God then said to Moshe, Moshe, since you have humbly disparaged yourself, it shall be called by your name. Remember the law of Moses, my servant. So fundamentally, what makes Moshe Moshe is the fact that he is a vehicle for Torah. And I think that's a critical element already in what we're about. Teaching is not about us feeling good about ourselves. It's not even about, as an ultimate aim, us building relationships with kids. But it is about being a giver of Torah. Torah as a greater purpose and a vision. And it's not about serving ourselves, but it's about serving that greater purpose or vision that Moshe was all about. Take a look at the next text. In the verse, write for yourself. The angels began to ask God, are you giving Moshe permission to write what he wants in the Torah and tell Israel that he wrote the Torah and gave them the Torah? God replied, God forbid that Moshe would do such a thing. Even if he did, however, I trust him. As it is written, not so with Moshe my servant, and all my household, he is the most faithful. This is a remarkable, at least for me, remarkable midrash. On the one hand, God is saying, don't worry. Moshe wouldn't do such a thing. If I tell him what Torah is, that's exactly what he's going to convey. He's a faithful servant. On the other hand, God says, even if he did, even if Moshe said to himself, you know what? Torah would really be better if it had this or that in it. God is saying, I trust him. What does that mean? God is saying, Moshe, I know he would never misuse Torah as a way to serve himself or his own personal agenda. Anything he adds, anything he puts in, any need that he sees that needs to be filled, he will always do so as my faithful servant. And I think about what a message that is as a teacher. We have to fill in for Torah all the time. We are constantly adding our own understanding, our own take, our own questions, noticing our own problems. We don't just put the Torah out there and it gets learned on its own. At the same time, imagine the trust that students and your colleagues and a community have to have in each and every one of you and me to trust that all the Torah that we're filling in, it's never about us, it's always about that. We are always in the mission of giving over Torah, even when we have to write some of that Torah on our own. The next text, very short, Moshe is reminding the people that when they received the Torah, they were scared. They couldn't handle it. And what they do is they asked Moshe to go up and do it on their behalf. And I think this is another common feature of what it means to be a teacher of Torah, to be a bridge. All of us have had students who are scared or overwhelmed by Torah. All of us have had students who say, that looks really good, there's no way that could be for me. There's no way that could speak to me. And sure enough, your job in that moment is to go up to that mountain and be that bridge and bring it down to them. You will have to receive Torah on their behalf and then give it to them. And help them deal with their fears, with their anxieties, with their difficult questions, and be willing to climb that mountain and do all that hard work. In the end, not to give them something of yours, but to give them something else, and to give them Torah. And all the difficulties of language and culture and belief and personal experience, you have to translate your way through all of that to make Torah accessible for them like Moshe did. And the last piece I want to emphasize when it comes to Torah is another midrash. And when Moshe descended the mountain, he did not know that rays of light shone from his face. From where did Moshe acquire these rays? When Moshe was writing the Torah, one opinion says, a drop of ink remained on the quill. He touched this quill to his head. It's like he had a moment of, I wonder what comes next. That's how I usually get ink all over my face, actually. And from here came the rays of light. Now, it's a fascinating little text, because the text is essentially saying Moshe became a Torah, right? He absorbed the ink the way the parchment absorbed ink. And the holiness that the writing gave to the text was also given over to him. Which means that the term being a text teacher actually becomes like a funny kind of pun. You yourselves become a piece of Torah. Through the Torah that you add, through the Torah that you teach, and the way that you make it accessible, it's not just a student and a text, but Torah is also you. In a way, Moshe becomes the first role model of Torah Shebaal Peh. Quite literally, he becomes a Torah. He is shining with the same light that the book he is carrying does. And that means our responsibility all the time as teachers of Torah is to also shine with that light, to embody that light. We are, in a sense, always then teaching our Torah, not teaching that Torah. But our faces have to shine too, just like Moshe's did. I want to leave you with a quote that I found online from, I don't even know who Liel Leibovitz is from Tablet Magazine, but she wrote something really powerful. I wanted to take credit for it myself, but I was worried some of you may have seen it, and then I would have gotten into big trouble. So if you hadn't seen it, I made this up. At the core of our being is a shared text, which we spend eternity debating. Our discussions, our disputes, our creative feats all stem from it. Take away our common canon, and we're left with that most debased and meaningless of commodities, opinions. In some strange way, that old chestnut about two Jews having three opinions gets it all wrong. What Jews excel in aren't opinions, the carefree and baseless expression of personal sentiment, but responsa, attempts to make sense of life that are rooted in a distinct tradition and a strong commitment to exploring and understanding its intricacies. When all is said and done, if you forget everything else, we are teachers and translators and givers of Torah, who must embody the Torah that we are teaching. Next principle. It's just as good as having a remote. I just point at Evan. It's the same thing. If you would come change my TV stations the same way, we would be in business. Okay. Klal Yisrael. One of the most unbelievable things about Moshe throughout his story in the desert is the way he consistently protects the people even when they fail and fail him. Right? The most famous one at Egel HaZahav, the people perform idolatry, and God said to Moshe, I've seen this people, it is a stiff-necked people, let me be, and I'm going to get angry with them, and I will consume them, and I'll make you a great nation. Look at this, Moshe. Big opportunity. You're going to get to be everything. You're going to be the avot and the prophet, and the covenant's going to be with you. You're going to be the whole enchilada. What more could a person want than in that one moment become the single most important person in the history of humanity? And Moshe, as we know, defends the people instead and insists that they can't be destroyed. Now, we read this story, we hear it all the time, but think of what that means, of what it means to have no moment of personal self-interest and only to be concerned about them, especially when that them are doing things you really don't like. They're screwing up. Now, I know as teachers that has never happened to you, right? You've never had the feeling of investing and caring about a group of people and have them fail, have them break the rules, show their flaws, ignore you, ignore what you're saying. And instead, Moshe's response is still, in spite of everything, to protect the whole, to protect the Klal. loving people and caring about them even when they disrespect you, even when they hurt you, even when it's so hard to imagine what positive is going to come out of this relationship, to defend them just the same. The next text, I think, is even a stronger example. It's after the episode of Korach, and the people are rebelling. They're trying to kick Moshe out. So God, of course, in his kind, sweet, gentle way, sends a plague. And the plague is killing people. Now, if that's me, and the people who are just this mean to me were getting hit by plague, I shudder to think I would grab a box of popcorn, a really good seat, and say, "Ha-ha!" That's not what Moshe does. He and Aaron literally form a human wall of protection to save the people. Those very same people who had just said terrible things about them, and their first reaction is to protect, to secure, and to save. It's that kind of commitment. It's very nice to say Klal Yisrael when we're all in our own little comfortable homes and our own little bubbles. What does Klal Yisrael mean as a commitment, as a value, when we're talking about people who we have real problems with, who we feel disrespected by, who we feel don't include us, who we feel don't take us seriously, who we feel are wasting our time, who we feel are making us feel like failures? And to stand at the front and to still want to protect and preserve and love those people, that's a commitment to Klal Yisrael. And for us in our work, that means loving and caring about each and every child in our classroom or in our school, even the ones that have the power to make us feel awful. That is what Klal Yisrael is about. But I think it goes beyond that. And I'd like to show you another source. And this one is kind of a strange one. It's from the Gemara in Baba Batra. I'm on source 3. Let me just find it here in English real quick. Our rabbis taught, a scroll of the law should be such and such a length that does not exceed its circumference, nor its circumference its length. The Torah ideally should be exactly as high as it is its circumference. Nobody can do it, and yet there it is in the Talmud anyways. Rabbi was asked about the size of the scroll of the law. He replied, with thick parchment, 6 handbreadths. With thin parchment, I do not know. We're still not at the important part yet, so don't worry. Rav Huna wrote 70 scrolls of the law and hit the exact measurement with only one. Rav Acha Bar Yaakov wrote one on calfskin and hit it exactly. So this one rabbi tried 70 times. He was 1 for 70. That won't get you in the major leagues. This other rabbi wrote one Sefer Torah, and he got it right on the first time. So, of course, what happened? The rabbis looked at him enviously, and he died. Which I think, for whatever reason, it's funny when you read it. But that's not our point. The rabbi said to Rav Hamnuna, Rav Ami wrote 400 scrolls of the law. There's a certain rabbi, he managed to write 400 Sifrei Torah. Now, if you do the math, that's an enormous amount of Sifrei Torah. Usually it takes a scribe a year. And assuming they didn't live to be 400 years old, this is quite the task. But look at the answer. He said to them, perhaps he copied out the verse, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Maybe he just wrote Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe 400 times. Now, when you read that, you're thinking to yourself, why would anyone write Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe 400 times? That's a really good question. I don't have an answer for that question. But more importantly from this, notice that the verse Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe is equated with writing an entire Torah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not a Tanakh guy, okay? And Michael Hatton will correct me, but I think there are more verses than just that one in the book we call the Torah. Michael's agreeing. It would seem what this passage is telling us, Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe is in a way the essence of Torah. Torah is not an individual project. It is all about Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe Morasha Kilat Yaakov. It's all about the community's acceptance and doing of Torah. Meaning, to be a Torah educator that's only investing in individuals, that's not Torah. Torah is a vision for the Klal. It's Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. Torah has, in the end, ultimate significance only as it pertains to an entire people accepting it and absorbing it. So our vision educationally cannot be limited to inspiring talented or interested individual students. That might be where we feel our most success. But the vision ultimately is Torah Tziva Lanu, Moshe. Our job is for that vision of Torah to apply and to work and be accepted by the entire people. That's the entire Torah. That's the purpose of Torah, and that we have to stay committed to all the time. That the fulfillment of the Torah at the end of the day includes all of us, even the ones we don't like, which is unfortunate, but there they are. You know, just as an aside, when you think of the story of Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain, when Moshe, right, when they first say, we don't want to go in, we want to stay here, the land's really good, it looks really good, we want to stay in Boca. I don't blame them. I also wouldn't mind living in Boca. And Moshe's first response is, you guys are terrible, you're awful, you're ruining everything. And they still insist they want to stay, and then he takes a step back and he negotiates. And he basically comes up with saying, if my choice is to lose you or to agree that you don't have to come into the land, I'll agree to you not coming into the land. Because the idea of losing you, that's too painful. And I often think about that as an educator, that the one thing we can't do is we can't lose people. We might have to negotiate. We often have to give up on certain things. We often have to wheel and deal a little bit. But the one key principle is Torah Tziva Lanu Moshe. We have to keep the Lanu together even when it tests us at the very core. Next slide. Or next, what do you call those slides? Call them slides? Okay. In spite of the fact that I've been talking about the Klal and Torah for the Klal and everything else, I don't mean to imply that our personal connection, our uniqueness, I even use that word, as individuals is an essential part of what we do. There is no cookie cutter of what a good teacher or a good role model is meant or supposed to be. When we first meet Moshe, when Moshe receives his mission at the Sneh, it says he's leading the flock out into the wilderness to the mountain of God. I've always thought of Moshe in that moment. I don't feel like he just happened to come upon the mountain of God. I always imagine him as a seeker. He's on a personal spiritual quest. He's looking for the mountain of God. And in fact, when God first addresses him, the first thing God does is identify him. First by name, Moshe, Moshe, and then telling him who his father was. Now, Moshe grew up without a father. What more important piece of information could there be for a young man, who at this point is not so young anymore, to find out, no, you do have a father. And it's not Yitro, it's not Paro, but it's actually Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But so, for me, before Moshe can start to worry about Torah and the Klal and everything else, he must have his own personal moment to figure out who he is. And I think there's an element there that's teaching us we have to always remember what our own personal connection, our personal uniqueness is to this project. We cannot be, there's no one type of Torah and one type of Torah teacher. And as many of you have wonderful colleagues in this room, none of you will succeed doing it exactly as they do it. Your success ultimately, as much as it's about a commitment to things greater than yourself, you must use yourself and who you are all the time. The term nowadays for you young folks is to be authentic. And for the first time, I actually like a current term. Because Moshe was authentic. In fact, according to some Hasidic Perushim, the fire that he sees in the Sneh is actually the fire of his own neshama. God revealed to him ultimately the godliness that was in him. And was telling him it's that fire that's going to redeem this entire people. You're going to do it as you, not as anybody else. So as much as we love to talk about Klal Yisrael and Torah and big purpose mission, we should never forget that our own personal unique connection, who we are, is essential to the Torah that we're going to teach. And I think the other example that I'd like to show you is Moshe in the cleft of the rock, right? In the Torah, right, after the people have gone through the golden calf and Moshe is now negotiated with God and God's now going to come with them into the land, Moshe does something very surprising. He says to God, show me your glory. right? It's almost like a stop in the conversation. Okay, now we've negotiated all this stuff for the people, the mission, the job. I want something for myself. I want to have a unique moment with you, God, for me. I need it as Moshe. And God, of course, agrees. And God shows him this element of goodness that Moshe wants for himself. So don't ever think that wanting inspiration or a sense of personal mission or even personal success, that does not make you selfish. That makes you authentic. It is essential to your work. And if you ever find yourself teaching and you feel that the words that are coming out are not your words, and the Torah that's coming out is not your Torah, you got to switch something around. And don't misunderstand. I'm not saying it's about you. It's not about students worshiping you or thinking you're wonderful or you feeling great. Teaching is not a way to boost your ego. But if you are not finding your own voice, your own individual connection, and you're not teaching from that place, something is missing. And something is not working. And you have to constantly work and revisit, even in the most difficult, challenging times like Moshe did, to find that personal connection again. Evan? This next one's a hard one. This next one's a hard one for me and I think for a lot of people here. Finding partners and colleagues. Most of a teacher's day, it's funny to say this, is spent alone. There are a room full of kids there. That's true. But there is a sense that what happens in my classroom, all is on me. And many of us often feel lonely. However, I think many of us also choose that loneliness. It is very comfortable and comforting to not have a peer around who could, God forbid, critique or judge or worse comes to worse, do it better. That would just feel horrible, right? Whenever you leave and a substitute takes over, what do you want to hear from your kids when they come back? Not that, oh, we had a very productive time of learning while you were gone. No. You want them to go, that other guy stunk. And you're like, yeah. Yeah, he did, and you wasted a whole week of your time. Very natural, very normal, not good for Torah. And yet it's normal. Our lack of colleagues is not only the evil structure or the evil framework. Our lack of colleagues often emerges from our own fear of having partners. And yet Moshe, as great as he was always seeking out partners and help. Right? The famous story in Bamidbar, right? Things are falling apart. And he complains to God, why have you made things so bad for me? How come you don't care about me anymore to carry this burden of this people? Did I give birth to them? That I should carry them this way? Right? Moshe says, this is too much for me. Moshe. Too hard. Too much. I'm too alone. And God's response, before God deals with the problem of getting meat to the people and everything else, he tells him, you're going to have 70 helpers. Some of your Ruach HaKodesh, some of your spirit's going to be shared with them. Right? I'm going to give you people around who can at least understand what you're feeling and what you're going through. You're going to get to share that burden. And then the story continues. There are two people in the Machaneh, and they start to prophesy, Eldad and Medad. And Yoshua is in a big panic. Because what does he see? Someone's threatening the kavod and the position of my teacher. He has no equals. No one should be in that spot but him. And Moshe's response, Halavai, everybody was like that. Do you know the Chazal say that the Nivuah of Eldad and Medad wasn't just some neutral prophecy, but that Moshe and Aaron were going to die, and Yoshua was going to lead the people into the land. In Yoshua's ears, he's preaching sedition. And all Moshe hears is, finally, I'm not alone dealing with these people. I wish they all could connect to me. I wish they all could understand what it's like to be me. The power of having colleagues, the power of feeling that you are in a joint enterprise with somebody else is essential to our success as teachers of Torah. The last text I want to show you, and I just like this text, so I can't really give you a good reason other than the fact I really like it. It's in Shir HaShirim Rabbah. I'm on source 3. And it said that the rows, the Turim, refer to two brothers, to Moshe and Aaron, who bestowed goodness on one another and each delighted in the success of the other. Rabbi Pinchas said, the verse stated, he will speak for you to the people, he will be a mouth for you, and you will be an Elohim for him. And now the rabbis ask the obvious question, Moshe is going to be an Elohim for Aaron. Is Moshe supposed to be an idol for Aaron? Rather, this means that God told Moshe that just as Moshe fears God, Aaron will fear Moshe. There's going to be a strict hierarchy. This is supposed to make Moshe feel good. God, Moshe, Aaron. Oh, we're all set. We all know who the boss is. We all know who the workers are. There's the school board, the principal, the teacher, the kids. Everything is very neat and clean. Yet notice what's missing there. Everybody's alone. Everybody's alone. What does Moshe do? Moshe, however, did not act that way. Rather, they came to the people shoulder to shoulder, each one rejoicing in the greatness of the other. Moshe made Aaron his partner. He didn't want the hierarchy. He traded in the authority and the power to have a partner, to someone to do that with him. My takeaway from that is, as we all talk about how lonely teaching can be, and how every leader can feel alone, it is an essential element of our success to find partners and colleagues. And we do so at great risk. To let other people see what we do, to comment on what we do, to disagree with what we do. But all of that is worth the risk because there's nothing more debilitating than feeling you are doing this work alone. Okay, optimism. This one's a really hard one. And it's so hard that even Moshe in many cases couldn't manage it. Moshe's, I don't want to say downfall, but limitations that occur, especially in the book of Numbers, I think are all built around his inability ultimately to believe that the people whom he's tearing his kishkas out over can really succeed. And we see it all the way through, right? The famous story when he strikes the rock and he calls the people, right? And he calls them, right, this rebellious mob. And then he strikes the rock. Without getting into all the interpretations of hitting the rock, is it anger, it's defiance of God? I think the picture that emerges there is Moshe doesn't like them anymore. He's angry with them. And he doesn't have patience for their complaints and their failures and their shortcomings. And the same patience that he showed 40 years earlier, he's been worn through. He's worn out. And he doesn't really believe they're going to get any better. And then that lack of belief ultimately leads, he freezes, right? In the story with Pinchas, right, the people are sleeping with Midianite women, they're worshiping idols, they're buying retail. Buying retail I threw in, Susan, it's not in the text. And God says, okay, gather up the leaders, hang them up, let's get this done. And yet, when everything is falling apart, the text says they are standing by the tent and they're weeping. Now, that's not a terrible thing to do at a sad movie, but in a moment of crisis, that's not what you're looking for. Why is Moshe weeping? Why is it that it's Pinchas who runs in and saves the day? My take on that is Moshe doesn't believe he can really affect a change anymore. He's looking at this people, and I think saying to himself, of course that's what they're doing. That's what they always do. I do that to my kids all the time. Tell them to clean the room again. What is the point of that? It's not going to lead anywhere. It's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to be a fight. And Moshe, at this point, he doesn't want to fight them anymore. And the rabbis even ask, we won't look at the next text inside, they ask, what happened to the guy who stood up to the people at the golden calf? 600,000 of them, he stood up there by himself. We know what happened to that guy. 40 years of being worn out. Yet at the end of the day, there's no excuse. At the end of the day, our success is predicated on our ability to believe in a positive outcome and a positive future. And not only for individual students. I'm not talking about our belief in the individuals in our classroom. I'm speaking much broader than that. We have to believe that this whole project that we've been referring to, this Torah, this Klal Yisrael, this bigger picture, this whole vision, has a positive outcome. We are working towards something that is really going to lead to something bigger and better. And that takes an enormous amount of faith, both in ourselves, our students, and the Jewish people. I don't know all the time where that faith is supposed to come from. I don't know all the time how we're supposed to manage that. I do think that one of the tools, or perhaps the best tools that we have, are the four things I mentioned previously. If we stay connected to Torah, if we constantly remind ourselves of a shared vision, a shared purpose for the collective, if we're authentic and true to our own uniqueness and our own voice, and we're always seeking to work and build something with others, perhaps all four of those principles yield the fifth principle, that something amazing is really possible. As Moshe demonstrated, it's a very difficult thing to achieve. At the same time, he can't lead without it. The reason Yehoshua replaces him is that he doesn't have that belief in their success. I mean, he had the knowledge. He had the cool staff. He was still very strong and vigorous. He was only 120. He is replaced fundamentally because he cannot see the people and see the vision that they're supposed to achieve. He doesn't believe in them in a certain level. And once he doesn't believe in them, he can't lead. So my translation for us, if we don't believe in the future vision of what we can accomplish through Torah, through community, through the Jewish people, through all these things we're trying to build, all the best pedagogy and best preparation and coolest smart boards are not going to get the job done. We cannot lead. And I feel that this is a thing we have to work on most, and often is a thing that gets the least attention. Do we trust that there is a positive outcome, both for every individual and for the collective? I want to close with just one more image of Moshe. In spite of everything I've said, how does Moshe finish his life? What's his last interaction with the people? He blesses them. And the Midrash says it's the first time he's called an Ish Elohim. Finally, when he's able to bless the people, because who blesses the people earlier? Bilam blesses the people, not Moshe. Moshe's too angry at them to bless them. It takes Bilam, who's trying to destroy them. He's the one who's able to look at them and say, Ma tovu alecha Hashem, right? You guys are amazing. Not Moshe. But Moshe has his moment. His final interaction with the people, he sees their potential. He sees their possibility, and he's able to give them a blessing. We are going to need those kind of final moments every single day that we go in to teach. We have to have the power to bless them and believe in all the rich possibilities, even the difficult ones, even the ones that get under our skin, even the ones that make us feel like failures, how all of them are essential pieces to this bigger picture that we can create together. That's got to be our mission at the end. Get the next. So for me, for my take, these are the principles that guide a Pardes educator. Some of us have all of them. Some of us have some of them. I would say we're probably all working on them. But in spite of all the differences that are in this room, these are the things for me, or at least that I personally have been working on and working toward, and I am hoping that they speak to a lot of you as well.